All right, everyone, let's get started. So, if you didn't see the announcement, the grades for Test 2 have been posted. Roughly similar distribution of grades, so they're meant to be pretty much the same level of difficulty, so keep doing what you're doing if you did well. Another little reminder I want to give you all. So we have 2 more units. We're at the halfway point. After we finish Unit 3, which is this unit, there's Reading Week, and then your first draft of the paper is due the first class after Reading Week. You will have to submit the paper both to me on e-class and email it to your partner for peer review. So 2 things. You should, first of all, if you don't have a partner yet, you should get one. Also, double check and make sure your partner's still in the course. A few people have dropped out, so not too many, but so double check. I believe as of right now there's an odd number of people, so there may have to be one, well I guess by definition there has to be one group of 3. If you wind up in a group of 3, do like feed forward, like one person gives it to one and then, so you should still only have to review one paper. Additionally, you should have gotten an email for spot reviews. So there's one in the middle, one at the end. This is my first time teaching this course, so you're all the guinea pigs. So the first review is very open-ended, so any comments you have are appreciated. They'll probably be more so for the people I teach next time, so it's a little bit of altruism to give any tips for the next time I teach this course. So that's due on Friday. There's a longer one at the end of the semester that I'll be giving course time for, like I'm required to for the second one. The kind of 10 minutes at the end of a class. Okay, that's all the housekeeping I have. So, as I say, we're going to start Unit 3, and I was looking over what's left. Oh, yes.
Can I ask a non-course related question?
Sure. I might not answer, but.
It's minus 10 outside.
Well, if you look at my YouTube channel, you'll see me in shorts into December.
Actually concerned for your well-being.
I told someone.
And I'm like, there's no shot. There's no way.
I'll just tell one story to. I don't know, it's just a funny story. So, back in BC where I grew up, I was known to sometimes run in bare feet, shorts, and a t-shirt, including in the snow. And my mom got a call from a friend of hers saying, like, is he okay? Does he need to be hospitalized? So it's just, I've just always done this. So I appreciate your concern.
And we agreed last Wednesday that 10 was the cutoff, I thought, but.
That's when I start wearing jeans, but doesn't mean I'll always wear them. Okay, so that's all I have to say about that. So as I was saying, so we're starting Unit 3 now. I was looking over the different topics that we'll be covering. There's basically just 2 topics left in the course at a certain level of abstraction. So Unit 3 is about the psychology of utilitarian judgment. So primarily Joshua Green's dual process model. And then there's some spin-offs from that, but that's kind of the core of Unit 3. Unit 4, most of the topics relate in some way to the issue of free will and moral responsibility. So there's a chapter on virtue, on the extent to which, so this is in the next unit, the extent to which our traits that we can cultivate determine what we do, or the situation determines what we do. Chapter on moral responsibility, and then a chapter on free will, which I will use as a springboard to talk about the psychology of punishment. So kind of a cluster of things that all go together. So in a certain sense, just 2 topics left that we'll be looking at in depth. So the first reading that we'll do before the chapter is the one of the 2 papers that made the trolley problem famous. So a somewhat different version of the trolley problem was first put forward by Philippa Foot, but Judith Jarvis Thomson built on that and produced the version that has come to be famous. As an aside, Judith Jarvis Thomson is one of the most important philosophers in what's called applied ethics. So applied ethics meaning, trying to connect it to real cases. If you're interested in looking into her, she produced what is probably the most famous argument in favor of abortion rights. We won't talk about that in this course, but that's something she's well known for. So she starts off with the standard, case where, this is the switch one where, should you pull the switch to redirect the trolley from hitting 5 to hitting 1? If you do nothing, 5 will die. If you pull the switch, 1 will die. And she says that anecdotally, most people, well, she says everyone that she puts this case to says, yes, you should pull the switch. I think we did a poll on this on the first day of class and found that, yes, indeed, most people are willing to pull the switch, leading to the death of 1 but saving 5. I have another case of an informal study of this. A philosopher had, with 2 kids, gave it to each of his kids. One was a boy, one was a girl, and he found a sex difference. Now, this is a small sample size, but I'll show the results of his little study. So, small sample size, you have to replicate, but kind of a funny little finding.
At the end, it kills you.
True story about that. I was giving a talk on my preliminary findings to the department. There was a professor there who I won't name because someone else named him Norman Brown. And he, at the end of that video, with the kid killing all the people, said, "Oh, that's my boy." So that was one of the And in that same talk, he at the end of my talk asked, what is the definition of morality? And I said, oh, well, I did my master's in philosophy, so, and he's like, nope, just kidding, that's enough. No, I don't want to hear anymore. So that's Norm Brown. So, this is a case, the switch case, where most people say it's okay to kill 1 to save many. The push the large man in front of the trolley is a case where most people say no, you can't or shouldn't kill 1 to save many. Another case in which probably even fewer people, actually let's get another show of hands. Maybe some of you have changed your mind over the course of the course. Not that we've talked too much about a specific case, but just to remind me, so how many say yes, you morally should pull the switch? You should pull a switch to redirect 1 to save many. How many say you should push the large man in front of the trolley to save many? So that's pretty typical. Now, a tougher case, a tougher bullet for a utilitarian type person to endorse killing 1 to save many is the organ case. So she mentions this towards the, or I guess she calls it the transplant dilemma. Here, I'll use the same term as the key terms. So in this case, there are 5 people in the hospital, each of whom need a different organ. So someone needs a kidney, someone needs a heart, etc. Conveniently, there is a perfectly healthy man in the lobby who is a match for all 5. He's there for, I don't know, stuffy nose or something, and you could anesthetize him, kill him, take his organs, and save 5 lives. So, show of hands, who thinks the morally right thing to do is kill the guy and take his organs? Someone almost. Okay, so a half out of the whole class. Right, so in this case, it's much harder to bite the bullet. So this is our first discussion topic. For those of you who said yes, you should push the large man in front of the trolley, why is killing 1 to save 5 okay in that case, but not the other case? And if you're consistent, you can discuss, maybe play devil's advocate and ask, is there any utilitarian considerations that apply in the organ case that don't apply in the pushing case? So discuss possible differences between these different cases.
But
Some
the other
gone
thing,
more
it's so
quiet.
hard on your
So
body when an
what are
organ
some-
fails. So
what are some
you might
thoughts
not
that
live
different
very long
groups
even with
have?
senior organs.
Yep.
I questioned whether or not there's no other possible solution.
Yeah, I think in both cases, usually the way they're written, if you give them to samples of people, is, you know, you have limited time, there's no other option to save the 5 lives. That's one way of kind of forcing you to make a decision.
I think you're sort of taking away, like, he could voluntarily use his own free will to choose to donate all his organs.
Right.
Kinda
Although the
making
fat man could voluntarily choose to jump in front of the trolley
Yes.
too, I guess. But, okay, so free will is one consideration you want to keep in there, yeah?
Maybe one consideration is like how the trans people that need the transplant got their illness. Like maybe they smoke so much and then they don't have lungs anymore versus they get born with heart disease.
Right. Whereas the people working in the trolley, hey, they're just, you know, doing their job. So I guess we could amend it to say, suppose they're all healthy people, otherwise healthy, well-behaved people who just got really unlucky with kidney disease or something.
Who's to say that the man who's on the train that's gonna get pushed out when it hits the 5 people isn't just gonna die from the 5 people impact?
Wait, I don't understand. What do you mean? So like,
Well,
so you have to push this guy in front of the trolley. He's big enough to stop it. Which part are you talking about?
Oh, sorry, hold on.
So just to be clear, so I was assuming maybe that you guys remembered it from earlier. So the situation in the footbridge case, which we'll talk a lot about in this unit, but so you're standing on a footbridge, and there's a very large man, or you can say a man with a heavy backpack,
Apparently he's
whatever.
a snowman.
And then there's 5 guys here. I don't feel like drawing 5 people. And the trolley's going along, and you're supposed to imagine like you're a trolley expert, and you know that this gentleman is heavy enough to stop the trolley by himself. He's leaning over the edge. He just needs a little push, and you'll save the 5 lives. So that's what the
But if
footbridge case.
the trolley was just gonna hit the 5 people, who's to say that dude staying on top isn't just gonna fall off anyway and die, right?
Oh, sorry, I see. So you're assuming that, or you're asking maybe the impact of the 5 would shake the footbridge and he'd fall off?
Yeah.
Okay, so assume you're also a expert in human balance, and you know that he's only gonna fall if he gets pushed. And try to get rid of those concerns. And this is a criticism that's brought up in cases like this is, yeah, fine, if you assume that you know all these things in advance, then it's a dilemma. In the real world, there's always uncertainty, so it is good pushback, but for the sake of the thought experiment, we'll pretend that we know he's not going to fall just from the shaking of the 5 people. Any other considerations that people have? Yeah.
Transplants don't always work, so they might not even like.
Good. Transplants don't always work, and again, the kind of annoying answer I give is pretend we know it'll work. But no, it's another good point. Yeah.
I think if you grant all the possible like things that make them equivalent, then you do just have to say that yes, you should kill this person in order to transplant the organs. But I think we kind of have a case where it's just like it feels so wrong from
Yeah.
like a sentimental, from an emotional perspective. You know, it's like the Kantian impulse. Like,
Yeah. It's a case where we feel the judgment so strongly that we don't want to use the principle to override it if we use the language of reflective equilibrium. I think I may have seen another hand. Yeah.
Say that like their survivors killed, those 5 might actually end up being more happy if they realize that they lived at the cost of someone else's life.
Right. Although that would probably apply to both. I mean, and that's fine. You could say that, yeah, one way to be consistent is, don't kill in either case. I guess I'd be inclined to be skeptical that that's true, though. Even if the 5 are somewhat less happy as a result of survivor's guilt, I'd be inclined to say the amount of suffering caused by all of their family, like, losing someone, and is probably wouldn't work out that way if you're a strict utilitarian, but it's one possible thing to put on the scales. Yeah.
We thought that in the transplant case, he's the man that's giving the organs, he's anesthetized in that case, so he doesn't really feel it. But for this one, like you're kind of just pushing him down so like he can feel the pain. So for utilitarianism, it kind of feels like you're maximizing the most amount of happiness for the 5 people, but you're kind of taking away from his as well.
Wait, so if I understand that right, though, that means that in a way the transplant case is better. Like it's like a utilitarian should be even more likely to, because you can anesthetize and do it painlessly, but getting pushed in front of a trolley is going to be unpleasant at least for a bit. So, interesting. That almost would tug you in the other direction than our intuitions go. So you've made the utilitarians in the room extra uncomfortable. So we'll return to this at the end of the chapter. I'll just briefly say as an aside. Now, I'm not a card-carrying utilitarian, but one thing utilitarians have done to try to save their intuitions in this case is you could say there's something special about hospitals that matters in utilitarian terms, where, you know, if people don't trust doctors, if people don't go to the hospital for fear of being anesthetized and killed, that's going to be a pretty big problem in utilitarian terms, that the amount of suffering caused will be greater. So one thing to defend the utilitarians' response there is, you know, imagine it's a case where there's an island, you know, and there's, I guess, 7 people including you. So 5 people who each need an organ, one guy who has all healthy organs, and you're the only one who knows how to perform surgery. So there's no wider societal implications to worry about related to, you know, people not trusting medicine. There it feels to me at least a little bit less wrong to kill the one to save the 5. So it could be that at least part of what's driving our intuition is our sense that there's something special about hospitals and doctors. Not sure that totally works, but it's one thing that people have raised in this case. So we won't spend too much time on the Thompson article. It's just kind of a classic paper, so I've included it there. What we'll do now is get through chapter 8, and we might get through all of it today. So I think I've already mentioned this before, but Unit 3 has just one chapter and a larger number of readings. So chapter 8 is kind of zoomed out, a zoomed out look at this area, and then we're going to go in greater detail. And this may be helpful to you as we come close to writing your paper, because it's a way of seeing how to look at one specific area, look at the kinds of debates that people are having, the kinds of questions they're asking, and develop a way to contribute one study that helps to adjudicate or add to a debate in the literature. So one way to frame this chapter is to talk again about reflective equilibrium. This is a concept that comes up a lot in the book. So remember, we have judgments, intuitive judgments that come first, and then we posit principles to explain these judgments. Sometimes the judgments lead to us changing the principle. Sometimes it goes the other way. That's the right point. And then once you've arrived at consistency, then you're at in a position of equilibrium, where you can, upon reflection, endorse the principles and judgments that you hold. What some people, particularly Joshua Green, who's kind of the main character of chapter 8, have done is to take a closer look at these, the intuitive judgments we have. Because you could say, well, these intuitive judgments, those are just reactions that animals like us have. And one thing we can do as psychologists is look at the causes of those intuitions. What kinds of psychological, biological, or evolutionary processes led to these judgments? And it may be that a deeper understanding of what kinds of processes cause these judgments may cause us to revise them. So this is a way of expanding reflective equilibrium to include empirical information about what causes our judgments. Yes?
Isn't that the genealogical fallacy?
Or the genetic fallacy? Good. So if you do it in a straightforward way of just, our judgment was caused by X, therefore it's wrong, that is a fallacy. You're going to have to, I guess also relates to the is-ought gap, you're going to have to bring other normative assumptions into the mix in order to make this inference. We'll be talking about that a lot in one of the grade readings, but it's a very important point. So here's one example of that. And there will be some repetition here because, as I say, chapter 8 is a zoomed out account of what's going on. and then the green readings will repeat some of this, but in a bit more detail. So to give you a flavor here, so one term that's going to come up again is the doctrine of double effect. So philosophers who think that pulling the switch is wrong, but pulling the switch is good, but pushing the fat man is bad, this is a principle they often appeal to that makes it justified, makes our intuition justified that it's okay to pull the switch but not push the man. And it has to do with, harming someone as a side effect or double effect is less wrong than harming them as the main goal of your action. So when I pull the switch, I'm not trying to kill that guy. Like, if he happened to get out and survive, I'd be happy with that. It's an unfortunate side effect of my action. It's not what I'm mainly aiming at. Whereas in the fat man case, I am trying to get that guy hit by the trolley. If he climbs out and gets away, my action has been thwarted, yes.
Is that kind of like the Nova effect?
It's sort of related in that both the Nova effect and this have to do with side effects that you're not mainly aiming at, but you foresee. But in this case, it's not exactly the same thing. It's saying that, so they're both about harm. So in this case, there's no good one. They're both bad things. In one case, I intend to harm someone, and it's the main goal of my action. Like, I'm trying to hurt them. In the other case, I foresee that my action will harm someone, but it's not what I'm mainly aiming at. So in the footbridge case, I am trying to get him hit by the trolley. And if he didn't get hit by the trolley, my action's been thwarted. In the switch case, if the guy gets out of the track, I'm happy. That it wasn't what I was trying to do, even though I knew it would happen. Does that make sense? What people like Green are going to maintain, though, is that this is a kind of rationalization. It's actually not what's driving people's judgments. They invent it after the fact to justify their intuitions, but in fact something else is going on. And one way of bringing this out, and Green will talk about this again, is the what the book calls the footbridge switch case, and what is also called the trapdoor version. So, trapdoor is easier to understand. So, let's say, same case, there's a footbridge, there's a very large man, trolley's going along, it's going to hit 5 people. But you're standing over here by a switch, and if you pull the switch, it will activate a trap door, which will release the fat man and stop the trolley. So show of hands, so most of you think that pushing the fat man is wrong. How many people think that it's good to pull the switch that releases the trap door? So definitely more than think it's okay to push the large man. And that's true with, you can give this to philosophers too, in large samples, you get the same effect. So people say, oh yes, I believe it's wrong to push someone in front of the trolley because you're using them as a trolley stopper, right? It's the main goal of your action to use them to stop the trolley. But notice in this case, you're still doing that. It's still the main aim of your action to get this guy in front of the trolley to stop it. It's just that you're further away. So what's really driving the judgment is you're not putting your hands on him and pushing him. That's what makes it feel wrong, not this abstract philosophical principle. So when people put forward the abstract philosophical principle, it's a kind of rationalization. It's not really what's driving their judgment. Does that point make sense? As I say, we'll return to it again in one of the green readings. A much simpler case that shows that our intuition can be caused by variables that we don't, upon reflection, consider morally relevant is a really simple framing effect that apparently even works on philosophers. Well, actually, I guess there's two things that work on philosophers, but the first framing effect is simply choosing whether to say, to cash out the dilemma in terms of how many people are saved versus how many die, changes how likely you are to endorse it. So, for example, if you say 5 lives saved, you are more likely to say yes, pull the switch. If you speak in terms of how many people die, you're less likely to say that. And this works even on philosophers. Now, so that's one thing that causes our intuitions to go in different ways, the words we hear. Is it saved or death? But upon reflection, no one's going to say, yes, the word someone uses to describe this dilemma makes a difference to which decision you should morally make. Yes?
Does it change depending on like the number? Like if someone says 5 people saved versus like 1 person died, would it still be the same likelihood that?
That's a good question. I don't remember. I won't test you on the details of the effect of this. It's just an example of a cause of our intuitions that no one upon reflection would endorse as a good reason for making the judgment. Another example of that is order effects. This one's probably easier to understand. So here's a way of describing it. So how many people say that you should push the large man in front of the trolley to save 5? One thing that affects it is which one do you give first? If you give the switch case first, so should you pull the switch to redirect it to kill 1, more people say that you should push the large man. Whereas if you give the footbridge one, or the shoving one first, fewer people then say that you should do it. And what's going on there should be pretty transparent, right? When you do the switch one first, people have the intuition, yes, that's fine. You hear the footbridge one where you have to shove someone in front of the trolley, and people feel like that's wrong, but they also want to be consistent, right? They don't want to contradict what they just said, so they're more likely to say that you should push the large man. But again, no one upon reflection is going to say the order in which I get the dilemmas matters morally. Okay, so I see that I went in a different order than I meant to, but that's okay. So I mentioned the trap door case earlier. So the one where you can pull a switch and it drops the large man in front of the trolley, saving the 5. The book has a mistake. It says that this experiment shows that distance is what matters. I may even catch myself saying that sometimes. Strictly speaking, that's not right. Green did other experiments that show that it's not about distance, but it's about laying hands on someone. So what's called personal force. So do you kill them with your own hands, or do you do something to physically cause it? We'll see that in Green's reading, but that's just a little error in the book that I wanted to point out. The simple reason is, if you have a case where someone has to pull a switch and release the trap door, but they're standing right next to them, so there's no distance, so I'm right beside the large man, I pull the switch and release the trap door, people are roughly as likely to say that's okay. So it's not distance, that's the reason for it. Good reminder that everything man-made is fallible, so don't blindly trust anything in the book. Okay, now we come to very important idea in Green's work that we'll be spending more time on, and that's the dual process model. So this already came up in height briefly, and as I said then, it comes up all over the place in psychology. So system 1, which you can think of as your first, when I was younger I always struggled to remember which was which. System 1 is your first reaction, that's the way to remember that it's system 1. Green in his work sometimes calls it automatic mode. And system 2, the sober second thought, if you like, which Green calls manual mode. So system 1 is quick and intuitive and driven by emotion and habit, whereas system 2 is slow and reflective and reliant on deliberation. So you may remember that in Height's accounting, system 1 is what drives moral judgment, and system 2 is primarily for defending one's moral judgments. So if you're asked to provide reasons, you rely on system 2 to do so. But system 2 does not exist to primarily to correct or change one's intuitions. Green, by contrast, is going to say that system 2 often does correct or change our intuitions, which is the more kind of standard version of the dual process model, but in his case applied to moral decision making. As we'll see, and sometimes people misunderstand Green on this point, he's not going to say we should always go with system 2 in moral dilemmas. It's going to be somewhat context dependent, and you'll now have a chance to maybe guess at what some of the relevant variables would be. So the next discussion question, should we rely more on reasoning or intuition when making moral decisions? And if, as Green thinks, it's more context dependent, maybe think of some different kinds of situations where we should rely more on one than the other. So see what you come up with your groups. Okay, it's gotten a bit quiet, so what are some thoughts that different groups had, if anyone's feeling brave? Yep.
I think in my opinion, in like most judgments you make, just go with the system 1, it saves you time, like you kind of need to in order to not waste your life. But then like system 2 would be useful when there's bigger problems or more conflicting issues for your unsure.
Yeah, good. So this is pretty close to what Green is going to say. So Green, what we're going to see in his paper is he thinks that for familiar moral problems, the kinds that we have experience with, either personal or evolutionary, or the kinds of problems that our evolution has designed us to deal with, their intuition is going to be more reliable. But in cases where intuitions of different people or different societies conflict, there we should use system 2 to adjudicate the disagreement. So he calls these unfamiliar moral problems, the kinds of problems our intuitions are not designed for. And then the empirical claim he makes, based on his studies and the studies of other people, is that system 2 tends to cause utilitarian judgments. Or sorry, I guess I should leave more space for that answer's got me going. But any other considerations that different groups had? Yeah.
We were saying like more to do with like how much time you have. So if it's like a fight or flight situation, you need to decide quickly, then like system 1. But if you have like a lot of time spent in other things, system 2.
Good, very good. So yeah, so in some cases you almost have to rely on system 1, or you'll just be paralyzed by indecision. So yeah, if you have less time, probably going to have to go with system 1, but if you have more time, then use system 2. Okay, good. I saw another hand.
I was going to say
Basically the same thing.
Like
Okay.
if you're stuck in system 2 and you can't think of which one you should do, and the gut feeling that you have with system 1 might just be the way you should go because there's some underlying reason that your gut feeling is going with that. So if you cannot use your reasoning system to come to a decision, using
Good.
this one might just be
Good. So that's actually a little bit different than her point. So if system 2 is just indecisive and just you can't evaluate all the different conflicting reasons, well, then just go with your gut, because there's probably some underlying reason for it. Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I think about this weekend, I got into a thing with one of my friends, right? And I was upset with them. And like, my intuition is to get upset with them. But my system 2 is like, this isn't the time and place to be upset, and we can talk about this later. So to me, I feel like we're missing the reliance on system 2. I feel like I spend a lot of time in system 2.
Good. So actually, that could be, if I understand it correctly, maybe a counterexample to green, because something like how to relate to your friends is going to count for green as a familiar moral problem, one that our intuitions are designed for. So in theory, that should be one where he says we should go with our gut, but in your case, you're like, I'm not so sure. I think system 2 may have been right in that case. Okay, that's good. Push back to Dr. Green.
I think in that case, though, it's still consistent, though, because as far as relating to, if I'm not mistaken, like if I understood the example correctly, I think as far as relating to the friend, it did go with their gut as far as being upset with them, but as far as the situation, like the context in which to do it, like when and where is the right time to act on that impulse.
Okay. So you two can figure out maybe how to solve each other's relationship problems. But so is that right, though, that you're saying that you still were going to get upset with them just later?
Well, like, not really. I mean,
Okay.
like, it's still something that overall I'm like, well, am I just being dramatic about it? Am I actually going to
Right.
have this conversation
So, okay,
with
so
them?
I think then this would count as a counterexample to green then. So we don't have to decide right now whether green's right, but no, it's a good example to think about. Okay, any other final thoughts? Okay, so as I said, so the core of his argument is that, at least in some cases, well, actually, let me back up. System 2 tends to produce utilitarian responses, and that, at least in some cases, we should rely more on System 2 for solving certain kinds of moral problems, and given that System 2 tends to produce utilitarian responses, we should be relying on utilitarian responses for those kinds of problems, the ones he calls unfamiliar moral problems. Now, an objection to this, which someone hinted at it earlier, is the is-ought gap. And Green is very careful in his work to try and avoid violating the is-ought gap. So the book mentions a paper by someone named Berker who argued that Green's work does constitute a violation of the is-ought gap. We'll see another paper later that makes a similar case. But in Green's 2015 paper, he's quite careful to say that, yes, he knows that you can't go straight from descriptive statements to normative statements, and that in order for his argument to work, you have to include normative or moral assumptions. The book mentions this in passing, so I'll just flag that we're going to come back to that when we see Green's 2015 paper. Okay, a few more things from the chapter remain, but they're kind of just little throwaway things. Are there any objections to stopping here? Okay, stop there. Have yourselves a good day.